We made this.
Make It So, a Star Trek Universe podcast, is now on Patreon, where you can support the show's production and gain access to all kinds of bonus features and content. To subscribe, check out what we offer at patreon.com/Make It So podcast. That's patreon.com/Make It So podcast. Thanks for listening.
Engage.
Helmsman.
I'm Captain Jean-Luc Picard of the Federation Starship Enterprise.
Michael Burnham, pleased to meet you.
What we leave behind is not as important as how we've lived.
We will continue exploring, discovering new worlds, new civilizations. That is the United Federation of Planets. That is Starfleet.
Make it so.
Hello everyone and welcome back to Make It So, a Star Trek Universe podcast on the We Made This podcast network. I am one of your two hosts, Tony Black. My co-host Kurt is having a little lockdown vacation on Riser this week, and in his stead, joining me to talk about Star Trek Discovery Season 1, Episode 8, Vis Pacem Bellum, and that's probably the first time I'm going to mispronounce this or something like that. With me this week is my special guest, returning guest from when we talked about Star Trek Picard, Brandi Jackola. Brandi, it's so nice to talk to you. We were saying just a minute ago, weren't we, that this is the first time we've ever podcasted, so this is extra special for me.
It is. It is. We've actually been in contact for a few years, because of Trek FM back in the day.
Yeah.
And so this is the first time, though, we've actually spoken, and it's lovely.
It is. It's really nice, yeah. And it's great to, you know Star Trek really well. And you say you're on Trek FM, lots of podcasts and stuff like that. So it's really nice to have you on Make It So again. And to talk about Discovery, particularly an episode which I don't think is necessarily, one of the episodes of Discovery that everyone immediately remembers. But it is quite an interesting one. But before we do, I want to ask you generally, we're hopefully weeks away from Discovery Season 3. But we will see. We still don't quite know when that's coming, but it's imminent. So we've had two seasons of Discovery. We've had short treks that tie in and things like that. But over the last 2 or 3 years since Discovery sort of made its mark, what do you think about the show in general?
I adore it. I have loved it since the very first episode, and that love has only grown as it has progressed and found its footing. And honestly, when you look at the first 2 seasons of Discovery, for me, this is personal opinion, of course, and you look at the first 2 seasons of other Star Trek shows, not including the original series, because they had a really good first 2 seasons, and it was the third one that kind of foundered a bit. But look at the first 2 seasons of Deep Space Nine or Next Generation or, something like that. And they had a lot of good, strong episodes in the first 2 seasons of Discovery, which honestly, I love the show. And I identify really hard with Tilly because I am a curvy girl. I am awkward. I am a ginger, so just keep on racking it up, and I often just talk too much or not at all, and I'm extremely emotional, so I feel represented for the first time in Star Trek with Tilly. It just brings me such joy.
I'd add to that you're a very charming person, and I think Tilly is also very charming. So give yourself some credit. It's not it's good stuff. Tilly is everybody loves Tilly. Tilly's everyone's. She's adorable. She is like the heart and soul of the show. So it's not a bad person to be. Like
no.
Really.
Oh, no, I didn't mean to make it sound like that at all because, there are some people who absolutely cannot stand Tilly, and there are some people who probably cannot absolutely stand me, but I don't care.
Oh. I'd be surprised if that was true. But no, I completely get what you mean. I think I've been really surprised rewatching the series. First time I've rewatched Discovery since it first came out. In 2017. So this is my first rewatch of season 1. I wasn't the biggest fan of season 2, so I will be interested to see how I feel about watching that a year later or so. But I think this first season, and I'm watching kind of concurrently as we record, so I've watched the first 8 or 9, and I'm really genuinely surprised by how much I've really enjoyed it. I have to say. I mean, particularly like which the episode that aired last week, Magic to Make the Sanest Man Go Mad, I thought that was terrific. I thought that was a terrific piece of television, a really great, pretty standalone story, even though there's lots of other little threads going on. And I was sitting there thinking, this is as good as anything from the previous eras. And
Yes.
I won't lie, Brandi, I didn't think that first time round, but I'm really starting to see it in this rewatch.
Well, I find that fantastic. Yeah, it's some people have taken some time to warm up to it, and that's fine. Everybody has their own opinions and their own ways of liking things. And so I don't get the people who hate watch it. I've never understood that. But, not everybody has to love it. Not everybody has to even like it. But going back and having a different experience, sometimes, our circumstances in life change, and that changes how we view things. And a couple of years, obviously, has changed the way you look at it as well, and that's fantastic. That's the beauty of Trek. You get different things out of it at different points in your life.
Absolutely. As we talk, I am in the process of trying to convince my wife to give Deep Space Nine a run, because she enjoys watching Star Trek. She's not a massive fan like us, but she enjoys it. And she's never sat down and watched all of DS9. She used to watch a lot of Next Generation with her dad years ago, but she's never... And I'm like, look, we can cut out some of the dodgier episodes.
Don't cut out dodgy episodes.
I know.
You gotta have the whole experience.
Yeah, well, it's true actually. But I think she'll watch it with me, so that'll be great to revisit, because I've not done a DS9 rewatch, I think, completely for forever. I don't think I've ever gone through it again. Same with Voyager actually, or Enterprise. And I've watched episodes obviously plenty of times, but I've never done a proper rewatch. So I think the time has come really. So with Discovery anyway, it's great to go back. Well, just before we move on though, just out of curiosity, what did you think about the ending of Picard? Because obviously you were on the Impossible Box with Kurt last season. So
yes.
Did you enjoy the last 4? What did you think about how it all wrapped up?
I did enjoy it. I am one of those people that, unless you really start to break my reality, the reality that you've created in a show, that I'm just like, okay, yeah, sure. And there were, honestly, my husband immediately, the first time we saw the Golem, Soong was talking about that, Dave turned to me and said, hey, that is going to be Picard's new body. And I said,
that's what my wife said. Maybe it's something about spouses. They get it straight away.
Yeah. Well, and my husband has never been a huge Trekkie. I mean, he's been aware of it and he's watched it. But, it wasn't until Discovery that he really just embodied all of it. And he even rewatched all of Enterprise and all of Deep Space Nine. And at some point, we really need to get back into Voyager, because I still have never seen all of those episodes, simply because when it was on UPN, they got preempted by a lot of different sporting events, wrestling.
Right.
I'm actually a wrestling fan, but I'm not a WWE fan at all. Okay. So, yeah. But so we just didn't get to see all of the episodes, because that was before we had a DVR. And so we'd put in the videotape and set it to record, and it would record an hour of, this wasn't Voyager. Okay.
Did you see that Voyager? Well, you may not have seen that Voyager one with The Rock then. Is it Sun Katse? I think it's called, the one that's got a lot of wrestling in it.
Yeah, I have seen that one. You
have seen that one?
Not as it aired, but I have seen that one, because The Rock.
Yeah, it's got The Rock. I have to remind myself. Yeah, actually, The Rock was in Star Trek Voyager. That's bonkers, isn't it? Really, looking back. But
good old Dwayne. I love him. He's adorable.
Yeah, he is great. So yeah, well, let's talk then about Vis Pacem Parabellum, which is the 8th episode of Star Trek Discovery Season 1, and it was first aired on November 5th, 2017, written by Kirsten Beyer and directed by John S. Scott. And the brief summary is that the Discovery is tasked with a high-priority mission to the planet Parvo to learn the science behind the Klingons' cloaking technology, while at the same time, on the Ship of the Dead, or one of the Klingon ships, L'Rell tries to work with Admiral Cornwell in order to subvert the sinister General Call. So there's a couple of different plot lines going on here. Generally then, Brandi, if you were to give this episode a mark out of 10, a rough mark out of 10, what would you go with for this one?
Well, first of all, I'm going to say I looked up the pronunciation, and it's Vis Pacem Bellum.
Oh, so, wonderful. Thanks. Okay. I'll try and remember that then.
I did that before we covered it on Live from the Edge because I thought, I don't know how to pronounce this. And it depends on where you look, but the overall, what's the word I'm looking for here? Consensus, that's it, is that it's Vis Pacem Bellum. So
gotcha.
That's what I went with.
No, it's good. That's great, yeah. I think it means, in Latin, if you want peace, prepare for war, which
that's exactly what it means, yes.
Makes sense, really. So, but yeah, anyway, what did you think? Did you enjoy it?
I did, and having the context of events in season 2, it is really interesting to watch Saru in this episode, because now we know what Kelpians used to be before the Baul developed the technology to basically fight them off and then kowtow them into believing that the Vaharai was the end of their lives instead of their evolution. And so to see his fear taken away and how aggressive he becomes at being willing to keep that feeling is frightening and eye-opening and amazing all at the same time. Doug Jones in this episode is mind-blowing.
I think it's kind of the first time that he gets to do this with Saru, isn't it, really?
Yes,
because all the way through we've seen Saru as a character who's mentioned, he senses the coming of death, and there's moments where, like in Lethe, he's quite aggressive and he's quite rigid, and he's not very likeable, particularly at times, Saru, and he's hard to warm to. But that's the point. He's driven by these emotions and by this fear. And you're right, actually, with the benefit of hindsight. And I have to say, the 2 Saru episodes, particularly The Sound of Thunder in season 2, were among the better episodes of that season for me, because they really dug into the character. And they took him to places that, by the end of Sound of Thunder, I was really quite satisfied with what they did with Saru. I thought that was really good. So yeah, I completely agree. I think it's a real plus point. I like this. I'd give it between like maybe a 6.5 and a 7. This one, because it really felt like a Star Trek episode. In so many ways, and that may sound strange because we've just had a temporal loop episode, which is a classic sort of Star Trek staple. We've had episodes looking at the Vulcan mythology and mind melds and things like that. And the pilot, the first 2 episodes were very Star Trek. In the way they dealt with things. So, but this it's the first time they get onto a planet, for one thing, which was actually a network directive, apparently. They wanted them to get off the ship. So, but I think that was a good directive in this sense, because they have been on a ship all the way through. So it's very Star Trek to beam them down to a planet. And, it touches on themes and ideas which do feel like characters out there exploring on the final front, in the final frontier, as it were. And that's something that modern Star Trek hasn't done a vast amount of. So I really appreciate it. I don't know what you think. I felt like it was quite Next Generation in some ways, this episode.
It was Next Generation, and it was a little bit of Voyager, and it was a little bit of TOS, but it was extremely Star Trek. Absolutely.
Yeah, it was, yeah.
So this directive to get on a planet and have an away mission was absolutely the right thing to do, because we have been in space this entire time, and it's okay to go to a new planet and experience new life and a new civilization, because isn't that what they're out there to do?
Well, yeah.
Even in the middle of a war, you can still find these things. So
it was nice to hear Saru, I think, when he's speaking to the Parvans, say, we are explorers from the United Federation of Planets, or something along those lines.
Yes.
I was like, oh yeah, I've missed that. That was one of the things I was disappointed with in Picard, and it's a natural extension of the fact that's a different kind of show. I know that, and I'm not ragging on that for that reason, but Star Trek feels at its core the most enjoyable for me when they are explorers and when they are going out there doing that kind of thing. And so I'd forgotten this episode did that, and that was a really nice reminder, a really nice surprise when they're down on that planet. So what would you say out of 10 then, if you had to roughly give it a score?
I actually would rate it an 8 out of 10, and I think that, again, benefits from the context of season 2 as well and what we now know of Saru. And going back and watching that is extremely interesting after having seen season 2. So I just really love how they worked it in. I do know that Kirsten Beyer was on set when they were filming those scenes on Pavo, which was actually in a forest in Ontario. Big surprise. And the conditions were horrible. It was raining a lot, and there were just mosquitoes everywhere. And people were just being eaten alive by mosquitoes. Doug Jones, completely protected by his makeup,
of course,
had no problems. But it was so humid that Doug would take off the gloves and just water would pour out of them. It was really difficult conditions, but they'd film a take and then they'd look at Kirsten and it's like, okay, Kirsten's crying. This one's good. Let's take this one. So,
yeah. That's cool.
And apparently she was, during the fight scene with Michael and Saru, apparently she was off to the side going, da 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 da.
You got to do it, haven't you? You've got to do a bit of a mock time.
Absolutely.
But this is one of the things that I think really strikes me about Discovery, and one of the reasons I think maybe, certainly in this first season, I think it works really well as a show, actually, is that I think they all get on really well. Like, all the cast, all of the writers as well. Majority. I mean, I know there were writer issues. I know there were some issues with some of the showrunners and stuff like that. But I think in general, particularly the cast, and you may well have done as well, but I've seen them all together at a convention, in the UK, and they just have such a fondness for each other. In a way that reminds me of how the Next Generation crew were family and were friends, in a way that certainly the DS9 crew weren't, in a way. And I'm not sure about Voyager and Enterprise. I haven't done enough research about those, but it does feel like that comes out quite a lot in the performances and the way they interact and the way they work on set, and when you get these stories that they're actually having fun. And I think that is something that comes over, and that's something I've really picked up on these early episodes.
Yes, I completely agree. I think they all gelled rather quickly, and you can tell, even though they're acting, you can tell that they all love each other like a family and that they're all in this together. And I think that only enriches their performances. And I love that aspect of it.
Yeah, it is really good. This episode, then, let's talk just briefly about the title. This is one of a multitude of other episodes in Star Trek that have Latin titles, have Latin words for titles. Here's a little guessing game, Brandi. Can you remember off the top of your head any of the others that might have this? I know I'm putting you on the spot here, so I have got the answers ready, don't worry.
The thing is I am terrible at episode titles. There are very few episode titles. Like, you can say this episode title and ask me what series it's from, and I can't guarantee that I can tell you that. I can tell you a plot of an episode, but I can't necessarily tell you the title.
Okay, I'll tell you what, let's play a fun game then, right? Okay. So,
cool.
I will give you a basic idea of the plot, and you've got to guess at least what season that is in, okay? And then I'll tell you the episode title.
Oh,
okay?
dear.
So, and there's a clue in this first one. Space station gets infected by a disease that turns the crew against each other.
Oh, well, that would be space station. That could describe so many.
Okay, well, DS9, I'll give you that, because it is that station. So,
right, okay.
If you can guess the season.
This is just a guess because they kind of all conglomerate into one big thing in my mind. I want to say season 3?
It's season 1, but they did have. You're probably thinking of Civil Defense, actually, in season 3 of DS9.
Actually. Yeah.
Season 1, Dramatis Personae, which isn't one of the most memorable season 1 episodes, but there's a Klingon ship that explodes and then they all start to turn against each other. It's not very good, to be fair. Okay. Now, these few that you might find tricky, because if you haven't seen a lot of Voyager, and they're all Voyager, so I'll tell you that. So, the first one, Tom Paris goes down to a planet and sleeps with an official's wife.
Oh, good Lord.
Give me the season. Have a guess.
Season 3.
It's season 1, and it's called Ex Post Facto.
Yeah, he was pretty randy back then. Ugh.
Yeah.
Let's be fair, he's pretty randy through the whole series.
He is. Okay, so the next one, Harry Kim wakes up and finds himself back on Earth, living with his girlfriend in what appears to be a weird, different timeline.
Season... I'm going to be wrong. I've just got a 1 in 7 chance here. I'm going to say season 4.
Season 2.
Oh,
An episode...
I almost said 2.
An episode called Non Sequitur. Okay, this one I'm less familiar with. Tuvok and Harry Kim become interested in a holodeck character who is more than she seems.
Oh, that's a Next Generation episode as well.
Yeah, I was going to say it could be any number of Voyager episodes. The amount they use the holodeck.
Oh my goodness. Yeah, it's like, oh, we don't have enough power rations, but let's just use the heck out of the holodeck. It's fine. You have to have rations to get coffee, but anybody can go onto the holodeck whenever they feel like it. I'm sorry.
Exactly.
That's one of the big flaws with Voyager.
Yeah. It's true.
But that doesn't mean I love it any less. Okay.
Yeah.
I'm going to say season 5.
Season 3. It's called
Stop messing with me, Tony. Come on.
Yeah, it could be any season. It's called Alter Ego. Okay.
Yes.
I'll give you one more, and then I'll put you out of your misery because there's like 4 more after this. Let's see if we can get this one. So, Dr. Bashir is sent by Section 31 on a secret mission to Romulus.
I know this is later. So I'm gonna say season 5?
Season 7, actually.
Season 7! See, it's right. Again, all goes together in my brain.
Right towards the end, Inter Arma Enim Silent Leges. Again, I won't have pronounced that right.
Oh,
yeah. So that's right before the final Dominion war arc, I think that one is. But yeah, anyway, you've done what that was really on the spot, right? And I put you completely on the spot, and I think, considering, you did all right, to be fair.
I did not.
So, the others are Terra Nova from Enterprise, which is about a lost colony. There is Vox Solar, which is another Enterprise one, in which a symbiotic alien comes on the starship and captures people in its web.
Oh, that was gross. That one just made my skin crawl.
Yeah, it's a bit weird, yeah. And then finally, Et in Arcadia Ego, Part 1 and Part 2 from Picard. So that's it. Those are the Latin titles. And you're never going to want to hear one again after what I just put you through, Brandi, but there you go.
Oh, no, I'm going to study up on every single one of these. I'm going to be ready for this quiz.
I'm so sorry for putting you through that. Okay, let's talk then more about... Actually, you pronounce the episode title because I've already forgotten. Go for it again.
Vis Pacem para Bellum.
Thank you. Let's talk more about that in detail. So, obviously, it starts with quite an action beat, and another Federation ship, the USS Gagarin, named after the first Russian cosmonaut in space, Yuri Gagarin, and it doesn't have a good fate in the end. Sadly, it gets. This is actually the first, after Magic is the sanest man go to make the sanest man go mad. This is only the second episode of Discovery to not have a teaser sequence. You've got the recap, the intro, and that's straight into it. I wonder why they went for that, because you could have had it cut off at the point after the ship blows up, and then you have the teaser.
Well, so, I think it's because, this is just my personal feeling about it, is because they had this dramatic episode where Cornwall basically gets taken by the Klingons, and then you have this weird episode that doesn't really cover any of that, and you're suddenly like, wait, what? Yeah. What's happening? And so they have the recap, and then they're just like, okay, now you remember where we were, credits, and then let's actually get into the episode. So I think that it's probably fine that they didn't have a cold open on that one, so they just went, here's the recap, because a lot has happened and you may have forgotten everything because the last episode was wackadoodle, you guys. So
I think it's probably a good idea anyway, because you're right in that this in a way, this is kind of like part one of a 2-part episode, because the ending really does have a cliffhanger that will be picked up next week. And that hasn't actually happened since, well, really, in many ways, since the pilot. And or maybe Context is for Kings to some extent, but even Context is for Kings doesn't end with a big cliffhanger that will immediately be picked up on. So it's kind of, in the old days, it would have been a 2-part story, I think, in many ways. But it's so you've had 3 episodes. You've had Choose Your Pain, which did feature the Klingons, but it was more about, Lorca and Tyler and then the tardigrade. And you had Lethe, which was all about Burnham and Sarek, and then you had a little bit with Lorca and Cornwell. And then the Time Loop episode last week with Harry Maud, which is a completely standalone story, really, in many ways. So we've gone 4 episodes since Butcher's Knife, where we haven't had much forwarded in terms of the Discovery's mission, the Klingon War, particularly the Klingon stuff either, L'Rell and Kol and all this. So it feels like this is an important time to sort of remind people, get back into that storyline. So I guess that's why they start with a big Klingon battle and some real casualties.
Yeah, they've got to remind us, hey, this is a war, and we're not doing well in that war. And that's even made more apparent after the Gagarin is destroyed, and Lorca has a conversation with the Vulcan admiral, whose name I can't remember now.
Terral, I think
Terral.
it is. Yeah, that's going on memory alpha. I wouldn't have a clue otherwise.
Yeah. So that's, and he's like, why were we the only ship in that area? And he explains, well, the others had also had surprise attacks, and things are not going well, dude.
Yeah. It's the sort of thing that in the old days, Star Trek would have... I always remember the last episode of season 2 of DS9 where the Galaxy-class ship is destroyed.
Yes. And
it was such a shocker. I was like, oh, they can't blow up that ship? What? Like, what's going on? That doesn't happen. So, it's played, obviously, as a sad beat and, increasing the stakes of the Klingons, but it's not as big a shocker anymore when a Starfleet ship blows up, I think. I think in a way it's lost that power, but it's important to see that they're kind of losing the war, really. Well, they're struggling to win it, at least. Yeah,
well, it still affected me when the Gagarin gets destroyed, because you're like, oh, yay, Discovery is there to save the day, and, they've got the spore drive, and they are gonna win this. Oh, no, they didn't. They did not win this fight. And you get to see the captain of the Gagarin and everything. And for me, because again, I'm a very emotional person, I feel that loss every time. It hurts me every time, because they really were trying to help. And, when you can't even lock on with phasers to a ship, how can you fight it? So,
yeah, it's true. Yeah, like I say, it's important to continue to establish stakes.
Yes.
And I found it really interesting then as well that obviously they're using the spore drive, and Stamets now is fully plugged in, and like in the last episode we find out that he's he can sort of, he's not restrained by either time or space, because he's the one who can see through the time loop because of being part of the mycelial network. But I love the bit where he comes out and he's grouchy, but he calls Tilly Captain.
I know, I love that.
And yeah, it's like, it's not mentioned again, and it's very much because obviously the whole thing has been, stated right now in that's what she wants to be one day, a captain. And it's almost like, I don't know about you, I took that to mean he's seen some kind of future where she's the boss, which is great, isn't it? And whether or not we'll get to see that play out now, Discovery's gone in a different direction or not. But I think it's really cool that they've still got their eye on that, as a character arc for Tilly.
Absolutely. And they continued that in season 2 by putting her in the command training program, which she absolutely deserves to be in, even straight from cadet. So I do love that foreshadowing, because you can take it multiple ways, because he's now seeing all reality all time at the same time, which is difficult for a human brain to interpret. And so when he comes out of the chamber and he sees Tilly, he could be seeing the future. He could be seeing Killy. He could be seeing a multitude of things. We are not really sure which one it is.
He could be. He could be. And I mean, I'd still like, even if Discovery spends the rest of its, existence in this far future now, I'd still love to see a beat where Tilly becomes a captain of a ship, even if it's a future Federation ship. In the 1,000 years ahead, it'd be great. So you could have even seen that. You could have even seen that future, which is really exciting. So I love that little beat there. That was excellent. Mm-hmm. I think obviously the core of this episode mainly involves two stories. The Discovery's there's not a lot on Discovery or a lot with Lorca particularly and that kind of thing. It's much more based around what's happening on the planet Parvo, really, with Burnham, Tyler, and Saru. And I think what I liked. Well, firstly, it looks, even though, like you say, the conditions were really bad in terms of filming, it looks particularly alien, doesn't it? It has a real sort of, it's got that light blue sort of ethereal, sparkly kind of glow to it, which I suppose fits the idea of these sort of incorporeal beings, the Parvans.
Yes.
But I loved the feeling that it wasn't just, like in the old days when they beamed down to a planet and you could, half the time you could tell it was a dodgy set,
the
and they all looked
rocks.
very similar. Yeah, exactly, yeah. This time it really feels they went to a trouble to really try and create an alien landscape for this.
They really did. And the way that they were able to tint the colors of the leaves and all of these things to make it something familiar and alien at the same time was just, it was beautifully done, because you're looking at it and you just believe it. You just believe it.
Yeah, you do. And it's great, I think, that they I mean, this, I imagine this is like an extension of the fact that Kirsten Byers writing the script, but there is a real understanding and sense of the Starfleet principles when they beam down and deal with the Parvans,
Yes,
you have them talking. Yeah, and that's what it reminds me of TNG, because it's the sort of thing you would have had, Picard beaming down with, Riker and Worf or whoever, and saying similar things and saying, we need to think about General Order Number 1. We need to, not exploit these aliens. We need to approach them as a first contact. And it's great that Burnham's doing that stuff as well, because you've got that beat with, and I love the conversation she has with Tyler when he's talking about this nice future he wants to have on the beach and all this kind of thing. And she says, oh, well, I'm going back to prison because this doesn't change my future. But I thought that was great to remind everybody that, yes, she's becoming more part of the crew and she's having this beginning of a romance with Tyler. And, she's becoming slowly more accepted by people like Saru and this kind of thing. But she's still ultimately got this is temporary. And I like the fact that even despite that, she's still trying to act like a Starfleet officer.
Yes, she is. And that is one of the strengths of Michael Burnham. And why she persists is because she is now taking every situation as it comes and using her best abilities to get through it or solve it or what have you, whatever the situation is. And it's always in the back of her mind that she's going back to prison, but it doesn't stop her. She keeps doing what has to be done, which, in my opinion, makes her a really great character, as well as other facets. I know there are some people who do not like her, but, they can have their opinions and I can have mine.
I think she's a really good character. I think she's got a lot of depth to her. I think she's got a lot of layers. She's got a really interesting backstory. Mm-hmm. And she's, by necessity, played with a level of standoffishness at the beginning, which really thaws. But she really does thaw. And, especially by the end of season 2 when she's openly sort of crying. In fact, one of the criticisms, admittedly, I think I had at the time with season 2, it'll be interesting to see how I approach this watching it back, is that she seemed too emotional. At times she was really she was crying quite a lot. She was, but then maybe watching them back in this sense make me realise that that's just could be a natural evolution of a character who starts at a point where she's a pariah, and she's locked away and all this kind of thing, and she's locked her emotions away in many ways, but then lots of events on the Discovery change that. They change who she is, and I think it's already good character development that you're starting to see that happen with Burnham. Yes,
and this is how I have felt about her being more emotional in season 2, because we have to remember that from the age of about 10 on, she was raised on Vulcan. And when she first comes to the Shinzo, she is still very Vulcan. She is not very emotional. And she hasn't figured out how to navigate that as an adult. And so she's never been in love. We know that from the last episode. So all of this stuff, this episode is a turning point for a lot of different things. It's a turning point for Saru, it's a turning point for Michael and Ash, and it's also a turning point for Stamets and Tilly's relationship. And all of these things are going on kind of independent of each other, but at the same time, it's like this mid-season point where it's like, okay, things are going to be different from here on out. And I love what they did with Michael and Ash. I thought, would you just get together already, for heaven's sake? This is not a soap opera.
But they did, they did that though. Looking back, they did it far quicker than I remember. In my head, it was more towards the end of the season that they start getting together. But it didn't happen that way. It's I know. Magic is the sanest man go mad. Magic makes sanest man go mad. Straight away, they're going through that really well written story of different timelines and kissing her at one point and all this kind, which was really good. But they have very quickly evolved to this dynamic where I really like their romance, actually. I really like the approach of that. I think it's nicely done. I think they work well together, and it's being well layered in, I think, at this stage. And it's quite believable. I find it believable, and I'm really enjoying seeing that develop, watching it again. Absolutely.
I could not agree more.
Yeah, it's nice because I like I say, I'm getting new opinions on some of this stuff now, which is great. You mentioned Saru, and we talked a bit about it towards earlier in the episode, but I think another thing that makes me think of TNG with this episode is that at first it seems like Saru has been possessed by the Parvans, and that he starts acting out of character, and he's saying, oh no, you can live here in peace, in that sort of, really sinister way that people who've been possessed. Oh no, stay here, it's lovely, you never leave. And then everyone's a bit like, no, I want to go, you're scaring me. But the more the episode goes on, you kind of realise that he's not really possessed. It's just unlocked something within him that has changed his viewpoint. And I think that's fascinating, because in the old days he would have been possessed. It would have been one of those episodes where Saru gets possessed, he starts acting weird, they have to find a way to reverse all that, and then he goes back to normal. But and no disrespect to TNG, but that's what they would have done. And by the next episode, he'd have been back to normal. He would have been the same character.
Yeah, reset.
But he's not after this. Yeah, exactly. And that's just the way it was done in the 80s and 90s. But in that show, anyway. But in this, that's not what happens. It feeds into, like we say, especially what comes later. So I thought that was really well done, actually.
I do too, and it is. Even knowing how the episode ended and watching it again, it was just still so fascinating and also painful to watch Saru as he descends into violence to keep this feeling of not being afraid. But I understand that. I understand why he would be so desperate to hang on to that peace, because he's never felt it ever before in his entire life. And now knowing that and then losing it, gut-wrenching.
In a weird way, it resonated with me because I do suffer from anxiety at times.
Same.
Do you? Well, then you may understand what I'm about to say here, and I'm sure plenty of other people will, because it's a common thing, and I'm certainly not on my own. But there are points where I've been exhausted by anxiety, which is a heightened sense of fear, irrational fear, ultimately. That's what anxiety really is. And it's exhausting. When you're afraid of something or a possibility, and you're exhausting the possibilities and extrapolating. And so for Saru to turn around and say, I've always been afraid, it did resonate with me in some sense, because there are times I feel like I'm afraid of nothing too often. Do you know what I mean? Do you see what I'm saying?
I absolutely do. And you can never control when you're going to have an anxiety attack. You can never know what's going to trigger it, and all of a sudden it's just there. And you just... I've had a few anxiety meltdowns. They're not as frequent as they have been, simply because I have bipolar disorder, and so I have medication for that, which, I had one doctor once try to get me off of my medication for bipolar, and I found another doctor. I'm like, no.
Yeah.
That's like I'm a diabetic and you're trying to get me to stop taking insulin. I absolutely refuse to endanger my health and go back to the way I was, where I couldn't even get out of bed in the morning. So I'm happy to take that little pill twice a day so that I can function as myself instead of a ball of anxiety cowering from the world. So, it's debilitating. Oh, it's debilitating, that fear.
And I mean, I absolutely haven't had that to the degree it sounds like you have, so I wouldn't like to say I know how that feels.
No, you do. I know that you do know how it feels. I can tell that.
In some way, maybe, yeah. And I think it's just, it is quite exhausting. So even though they don't frame it in the same terms, I think Saru is kind of their way of exploring that kind of character and exploring that kind of emotion in the idea of the Kelpians having, this heightened sensitivity and stuff like that. It is almost like Saru is the character to explore anxiety through. And that's something that's modern for Star Trek, because you never really had that in previous Star Trek series, because anxiety kind of wasn't a thing, back then. Or it existed, obviously, and people suffered from it, but nobody really talked about it back when I was a child. And I think we're probably around similar age, I would guess.
Oh, I think you're a bit younger than I am, dear. But okay.
Well, can I ask how old you are without being too rude?
I will be 47 next month. Yes,
well, I don't believe you.
It absolutely is true. I was born in 1973.
No. I'm 38 in about 6 weeks. So yeah. Oh my God, I did not think you were. Not that that's old, but I really didn't think you were 47. So you are
I don't
wearing
act
very
my
well.
Yes, I do not act my age, darling, because why bother? It's just have fun.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, maybe if we're not exactly the same age, then we might be of a similar-ish generation, and certainly maybe have grown up in our own different ways with that 80s and 90s Star Trek. So I think back then we didn't really see that kind of character or that kind of portrayal, I think. I don't know if you felt that from that age, but I didn't. So it's nice to see a character like Saru in some senses reflect that, I think.
Yes, I agree. The only character I can think of that really reflected that, and it was put in a negative light, which always bothered me as a child, and that's Barclay from Next Generation.
Yes, of course.
And I did not like how they portrayed him at all. I did not like how the rest of the crew members treated him. Because I was that awkward person. And so when I saw that, and I saw that these things weren't desirable, I thought, oh, great, this is the world that I'm living in. Because it's Star Trek in its whatever time it's in is a reflection of that time. It's a reflection of the politics that are going on at that time, of what the world concerns are going on at that time. And some of those themes are universal throughout time. And some of them are very specific to what's going on in that decade or whatever. And so it was really hard for me to watch those episodes with Barclay and see how they treated him, because I just thought that there's not something wrong with him. It's how people are perceiving him and treating him, and that's giving him anxiety. Yeah,
it's true. And there are episodes, and I haven't watched a lot of the Barclay ones, but funnily enough, the first Next Generation episode I remember watching was Realm of Fear, which is where he's scared of the transporter.
Yes.
And that always sticks in my head as an episode. It's not necessarily one of the best TNG episodes, but I always remember that one, because as a kid it really left a mark on me, and I thought Barclay was like one of the main characters because he's got such a major role in the episode, and every now and then they do a story, but then it did always seem like he was the freak. He was a bit, and you're right. I think that's true, and I think in this case, Saru isn't approached like that. It is something that they're not sure about when he's, quote unquote, possessed by the Parvans, even though he's not. But then by the end of the episode, they come to an understanding about what it was, and they discuss it, and he explains the feeling, and you really feel for him in that final when he's on the biobed.
Absolutely.
You really feel for him, and you think, and that's the point. I was like, I would love that kind of peace. I would love to experience a day of complete lack of anxiety. And in a weird way, Brandi, I've felt that more in lockdown, oddly enough, because it's felt like the world, even though it's a horrible situation, and we're recording this during the COVID-19 pandemic for anyone in the far future when hopefully it's all right. And I'm lucky in that I haven't been directly, as of yet, affected by it. So, it's a horrible situation, and I feel for anyone who's going through it, but I felt a level of peace in my lockdown situation. And on one level, I'm quite enjoying the solitude of it and being able to do that. So in a way, it relieved me of some levels of anxiety, which is strange. I find, for me, it's going out into the world and having interactions with all kinds of strangers and things like that, for me, that will trigger points where I'm overthinking or I'm worrying or I am stressed, So
I do know.
It's very rare that I get those days of peace.
Yeah, no, I identify with that so hard. I am, though it may not seem like it, I am an introvert. I get my energy rebuilt and recharged by being alone. Social interactions, though, with people I enjoy and trust are pleasant, but they are still draining. And so being required to stay home except for going to work and going to get food and things like that, which are required things to keep me alive. I love being released from that social contract for this time being. I know it sounds terrible because there are so many people going stir crazy, and I'm just like, I wish I didn't have to go to work because then I could finish Final Fantasy VII Remake, thank you very much, and I could read all of these books that I am behind on, and I could catch up with all my comic book issues, and I would never be bored if I never had to go outside again.
No, it's exactly how I feel, Brandi. Exactly. We're kindred spirits in that sense because I'm exactly the same. And I feel almost bad for saying that in a way that I feel less anxious by being at home and by being in this kind of lockdown situation. But it's true. And I think, so when you watch Star Trek, which is particularly good at sort of tapping into to people's different feelings and lives, and with this, I really did feel for that. And it really surprised me how much this episode did resonate on that level, actually, and more than because I didn't really remember a lot about this one. I won't lie. So I was really rediscovering it, and so it was really interesting what they did with Saru. But what do you think about the Parvans then? Moving on about them as a race, because obviously we don't know a lot about them here in this episode. But do you think they came across well? Do you think they were well developed or anything like that?
Well, it's interesting because our puny human brains can hardly process the fact of a race that is one with its planet and its nature and its surroundings, and also completely at peace and wanting to provide that peace to other people. Unfortunately, you can't force something like that, and they know that, which is why when Saru starts getting really aggressive and he's trying to destroy the transmitter that's attached to this amazingly beautiful crystalline tower. Oh my gosh, the visual effects on that, just glorious. And, the Pavans bring Tyler to them. And, to help with the situation, because they're like, no, this is not what we wanted. No, everybody's supposed to be happy and at peace. You're not happy and at peace. So let's bring this guy over to help sort of mitigate the situation. They're trying so hard to just help everyone be their best selves, really, because this race is already their best selves. And they want for nothing. What would that be like? I can't honestly understand that feeling because we humans are so flawed that I'm not sure we'll ever get to that. We might.
Well, maybe we will. Maybe we will. I mean, we might be that cloud of gas by the time we get there in a million years or whatever it is. But yeah, it's right now it does seem really unattainable. It seems like we're a long way from that world, and it is very tempting. It's a beguiling concept that Kirsten Beyer creates here, a planet of complete peace that's symbiotic. That is one big organism in a way, and that's I thought they were a fascinating way of doing a non-corporeal, because we've seen lots of non-corporeal, races in Star Trek over the years, and particularly in shows like TNG and Voyager. There's loads of these kind of aliens knocking about. But this one, I think she thought it through a lot. I think Kirsten Beyer really mapped out a sort of backstory in a way for them, and a real sort of ecosystem. And I think even though they're not on screen, it's not a massive amount we see them. I think I really felt like they were an interesting alien species, and it was so nice to go out there and meet some new aliens.
Yeah, and that's the power of Kirsten Beyer. She is always thinking about how they got to this point, and that's what makes a good character or race or anything in a story, is that their background, where they started and where they are now and how they got to that. Now, we don't necessarily see any of that on screen, but you can see it in the final result. You can feel it, that she knows what that journey is. She's created that journey, even though we don't get to explore that very deeply. You can feel it. You can see it. You understand it. You just accept it, because she's just that good.
She is. I thought the script was really good for this. I thought she crafted a really solid story for that planet, and a really interesting. And to be fair, both stories I think were quite good. I think we should talk a little bit about the Klingons and Cornwall and things like that, because I think that was a good follow up from Lethe, and I suppose it sort of blends the two. It's Lethe and Butcher's Knife. But last time we saw L'Rell, is the last time we see Vok, and she's getting him to where he is, which we don't yet know, but
I did. I'll be honest, I called it really early on.
Did you guess?
I absolutely
did. You guess it?
Yeah.
Wow. Okay. No way. That's good. I hadn't got a clue, I have to say.
Yeah. Really early.
Wow. That's pretty good. Yeah. So that's interesting. How did you? If you looking back, then were you sitting there every week waiting for that shoe to drop?
Yep.
And for that reveal? Yeah, you were.
I was.
How did it affect you watching Tyler then, and watching him built up as a character, and his relationship with Burnham and things like that?
It was hard for me, because I wanted to believe that maybe how do I put this? Obviously, there was conditioning that had happened and a personality implanted. And I wanted to believe that the Ash personality was going to win out on that. Because I didn't know exactly how this process happened. But, early on when L'Rell tells Vok that he will, she's going to send him to these mothers, and they're going to basically transform him. And that she implies that he's never going to be himself again, which is true. So it was kind of half painful for me every time I saw Tyler and Michael getting closer, because I thought, this is not going to end well, because eventually Vok is going to be triggered in some way, and that does happen fairly soon in this. And it's just hard, because I feel so bad for Ash, because I think Ash is a good person, but he can't control Vok. He doesn't even know Vok is there. And it's heartbreaking. So I took all of those scenes were difficult for me. But the minute that I saw Ash, I thought, this is too convenient. And the fact that they managed to escape with only 4 or 5 ships chasing them, and I was reminded of Star Wars. They let us go. There's no other explanation for the ease of our escape. And I was like,
yeah.
That was all set up.
Yeah, maybe we should have been a bit more alert there. Definitely, I think. I think there were a fair few people who did suspect. Don't get me wrong, but. Yeah, I think it's it is interesting how they do build up Tyler as a likable character and a really good dynamic with Burnham here, and then on the flip side he seems very far away from all the Klingon stuff going on, but I think I liked. I mean, L'Rell gets more to do, if I remember rightly, later in the season.
Yes,
and she gets bits and bobs in season 2, but I enjoyed some of the interactions here. I mean, Cornwell's a good character anyway. And it shows the strength of that character in that you can do an entire subplot with her and another character and it not feel out of place, it not feel forced, it not feel like we need to get back to the crew and our main characters. You know, they're strong enough semi-regular characters, those two, in order to carry these scenes, I think.
I agree, and I love seeing two powerful women together, both at odds and working together. I just love seeing powerful women because we need more of those on screen. Thank you very much. There's still this idea that, you know, audiences are not going to respond to a female-driven story, and I think we've proven that they absolutely will.
Yeah, absolutely.
But I loved the two of them together, and just reading about behind-the-scenes stuff, Mary Chieffo and Jane Brooke absolutely loved working together, absolutely loved doing those scenes. They really went at it during the fight scenes. Like, they really went at it. And you can tell. It works so well. No one was sure if the chemistry was going to work between these characters, and immediately it did. Just immediately.
It did. Yeah, it did. They're really good together. They really work well. And you really, you know, I felt a level of, I didn't necessarily know at times whether Laurel was trying to play Cornwell here or not. And I mean, the impression is by the end that she's not, and that she's genuinely wants to take down Cole, because he is very one-dimensional, evil bad guy at this point. You know, he's killed off people that she cares about. He's not uniting the houses out of the same sort of unity that Takuvma, even though he was a fundamentalist, wanted to do. Cole wants to be a dictator. You know, he wants to run the shop, and Laurel is struggling with that. So he's a very easy Klingon baddie to hate in that sense. But I still think at the same time, I like the ambiguity with Laurel in that she's not a good character. She's not a good guy, but at the same time, she's not out and out evil. You know, there are some subtleties and some nuances with her. And obviously later on, we find there's some very troubling things that she did with Ash. But that's what makes her a character with shades. And I think when you do see her, I think she's quite an interesting Klingon character, definitely.
Yes, I love the facets because you really are never quite sure where she stands. My personal feeling from season 1 is that her one concern is making sure that Voq does what he was sent to do, but also because she loves Voq. And there is a part of her that wants him back, even though she knows she'll never truly have him back. And plus, we all have to remember, again, context from season 2, that she was pregnant with Voq's child, which, you know, the child was gestated outside of her. So she could continue doing what she had to do, what she felt she had to do. She's very determined. She's a great character because no one is 100% good or evil. And showing the conflict within her and the different facets of her is... I want to see her in the future. I really do. I don't know how that they would do that on Discovery, with Discovery being so far in the future.
She might come back. You know, you never know. They might be able to find a way. Because they all like Mary Chieffo as well, I think, as an actor.
They love her. And
as a person.
She's a fantastic person. And she's so young.
She is.
She's ridiculously young to be able to have the gravitas that she does on screen. It's magnificent. I just adore her.
I think part of it is that she's from... her parents are both character actors. You know, her dad, Michael Chieffo, has been in loads of things. He's particularly good in an episode of The X-Files, actually, where he plays a kidnapper of a young girl, and he's terrifying. He's brilliant.
Oh, yeah, I remember that. I did not remember that was... Yeah. Oh, wow. I'm going to have to go back.
That's Mary Chieffo's dad.
Yeah.
An episode called Oublié in season 3. Yeah.
Oh, really I remember
good.
it.
And then... Yeah, really creepy episode. And then her mum is Beth Grant, who's been in loads of things. She was in Speed, particularly. She was the lady on the terrified lady on the bus in Speed. So she comes from quite you know, they're not mega famous actors, but they're good actors, and they've been in lots of things. So you can tell she's already got talent, and she just seems really funny. I'll never forget that Instagram video she does where she's dancing around dressed as Laurel.
Yep, she's lip syncing to some song. I can't remember which one it is now. But I'm just like, oh, yes, funny. Yes. And you see, of course, Shazad Latif taking part in that as well in the back.
Yeah.
It's great. It's
really
just great.
Good.
It's wonderful.
Yeah. So you really feel that come out. So they're interesting, both really good. It's a good subplot, and I think it puts that in a good position. Mm-hmm. But then obviously we get the final scene, which is a big cliffhanger, and the Parvens, like you said, trying to do the right thing, have inadvertently led the Klingons to the planet, and it ends on it ends with a bit of circularity, doesn't it, to the pilot, because they're going to face the sarcophagus again. And they haven't come face to face with it. Well, the Discovery never has, but the Shenzhou came face to face with that in the first episode and second episode. So it's a nice bit of circularity to the pilot in the way, and it's coming back to them facing that ship in the next one. So I thought it was a good cliffhanger that set up the sort of mid-season finale, wasn't it? The next episode.
Yes, and the Pavans are reacting exactly the way that we've been led to believe that they would. It's like they're a parent, and they're getting two siblings to sit down and talk out their differences, and they don't quite yet know about what's going on with the Klingons and their ferocity, but they are completely convinced that they can make this work. That's my particular feeling about what the Pavans are doing at this point. They're just like, oh, well, you're having this conflict. Well, let's just solve this right now.
Yeah. In that naive sort of alien way, and they don't understand the nuances of who they're inviting. But yeah, definitely. So yeah, that's where this episode comes to an end with that cliffhanger. So let's talk a little bit about the feedback we've got, which is that we haven't got much for this one. So we've got a couple of points that have been made, but I think they're good points in the Make It So podcast fan group. So thank you for those who have responded. But Jane Boyle says, and I think this is an interesting point. Jane is somebody who is not necessarily a massive fan of the new era of Star Trek, but I think she makes an interesting point here that I have a different view to. She says, I find most of the episodes unmemorable when talking about Discovery. It's hard to associate the episode titles with anything in particular. I note that I said about this one at the time I watched it that it was the first one that felt like Star Trek. I do agree with her on that one. This seemed to be the point at which the series slowed down and abandoned some of the overuse of so-called quote-unquote modern techniques, rapid cutting between scenes, bizarre camera angles, etc., which made it easier to watch. I think there have been episodes before this that feel like Star Trek. I definitely think the time loop episode feels like Star Trek. I definitely think that there are parts like Lethe that feels very Star Trek. I think the first two episodes of the pilot feel very Star Trek. But I see what she means in terms of this being a much more of a 90s style Star Trek plot in some senses. Mm-hmm. But I do disagree with when she says that I don't find most of the episodes memorable, because I have watching it back realised that I definitely would be able to, if somebody said to me, okay, Lethe, or they said magic to make the sanest man go mad, or said Vis Pacem Parabellum, sort of tried to say it there properly.
It's Vis. It's the V is pronounced like a W, so Vis Pacem Parabellum.
Vis Pacem Parabellum.
You got it.
I got it, finally. Yay, towards the end. If I think about those episodes now, and the pilot, I can distinguish them. If somebody said the episode titles, I would be able to go, oh yeah, that's the one with Burnham and Sarek and the mind meld. Or, oh yeah, that's the one with Harry Mudd and the time loop. Or, oh yeah, that's the one on the planet with the crystal thing. So I think I would say to Jane, and I'd say to anyone, try and give it a rewatch if you haven't, because I really found these things became more apparent when I look back, and I'm grateful to say, certainly this first half, and the second half is I've yet to decide, but the first half I really do think some of these episodes do stand out.
I agree, and this is my response to the whole doesn't feel like Star Trek. If you're feeling that way, stop judging the current series by what has come before and take it on its own merits. Because it is all Star Trek. And yes, there may be some things that people don't like. I, for instance, absolutely despise 2 out of the 3 Kelvin films. Does that make it not Star Trek? No. It's still Star Trek. It's just not something that I enjoy. So, it's if you're saying it doesn't feel like Star Trek, that's just because of your own personal opinions. That doesn't mean it doesn't feel like Star Trek to someone else. Because all of them, I was raised on the original series. And when Next Generation came along, it was very different. But I still felt like it was Star Trek because it was Star Trek.
Yeah. I think that's fair. And I think pretty much everybody in that group does have an open mind about Star Trek. But I think there is definitely a sense that there is a resistance, and I have had it myself at times, I have to say. There is a resistance to the modern era and to some of the changes that have been made. But I think, like anything, it takes time for these things to settle. Now I'm watching this back, I'm really starting to see the positives in Discovery more than I did at the beginning. And I think the same will be true of Picard and some of the misgivings I've had with some of the Picard stuff, even much as I really enjoyed the majority of it. Mm-hmm. And I think you have to let these things settle. People had misgivings about DS9, they had misgivings about TNG.
All of them.
All of them, pretty much all of them. They had misgivings about. And now people look back and they're enormously fond. Even the crap episodes they're enormously fond of. And I think, and that's yeah. Well, God, yeah, exactly. I laugh at that. I did watch that one.
Yeah, I still watch it. There are parts of it that I absolutely adore.
Well, Duncan Barrett and I talked about it on a Primitive Culture for Trek FM when we were talking about The Prisoner, the 60 series. Mm-hmm. And we watched Move Along, and I watched Move Along home with my wife, and maybe this is one of the reasons that maybe she hasn't wanted to watch DS9, but I watched it with my wife, and she sometimes still says, Alan Moraine, 1, 2, 3, Alan Moraine, just when we're mucking about, or something really silly comes on the TV with people dancing, and she'll go, Alan Moraine, 1, 2, 3, and that's it. You do remember even these terrible episodes, but you can look back and laugh at them and enjoy them. And I think that's the thing. There are some episodes of these modern era Trek shows so far that haven't been great, but I do think, Brandi, in 10 years people will look back at Stardust City Rag and find stuff. I think I will look back at Stardust City Rag and find stuff to enjoy in that more than I do now. So I think that's just the nature of Star Trek in many ways.
I think it's the nature of pretty much any creative work. Is sometimes it appeals to people immediately. Sometimes it's a slow burn. And, that's the thing. It pays off to revisit things that you maybe were kind of tepid on to see. Because, again, it's all about where you are in your life. When DS9 first started, it was not something that I really got on with immediately. And, in fact, I didn't even watch the whole series at the time. 20 years later, it was a completely different experience. So it has so much to do with your perceptions of who you are and where you are in your life as to how you react to everything, really. Absolutely.
I 100% agree with that, definitely. Finally, the last bit of feedback we got from Craig McKenzie, one of our guests, last week's guest actually, with Kurt. I like this one, Craig said. In some ways it's the most Star Trek, quote unquote, episode of the first season, which we've been saying, at least in a traditional sense. I like the work done with Saru here and how dangerous they made him out to be given the right circumstances. The Parvans were impressively alien as well. I also enjoyed the space battle, more of Lorca being a condescending leader to force his team to get better, please. Similar sentiments to us, I think, from Craig there. And that's interesting about Lorca, actually, because we don't get a lot of Lorca in this episode, but we do get a little bit of him being quite tough. And that's the thing, he is... That's the other thing that stood out to me with this rewatch. He is very much a wartime captain. Much as he is, we know with hindsight he is not who he says he is, and that there's the other side of his character. But he is, at the same time, much more of a military wartime captain than we've seen on Star Trek. And I think it's been quite enjoyable to watch that, knowing where he ends up, actually.
Yes, I agree. And the thing is, with that particular scene, he's barking all of these orders. Could I trouble you to fire at something, Mr. Reese? And it's just kind of like, it's not his fault. It's not Reese's fault that he can't lock onto the ships. And so, I can understand the condescending to make somebody be better, but there's nothing that Reese could do about those circumstances. So I just kind of felt bad for him. I'm like, oh, buddy, let me give you a hug. I'm sorry about that. Don't listen to that guy. He's a jerk.
Yeah, we need to get Tilly on the bridge at that point. Just give him a hug and go, it's going to be fine. It's going to be fine. But yeah, thank you to those of you who did have thoughts, and anyone who is listening. And let us know, let us know what you think about this episode. If you've got any more thoughts, put them in the group. Absolutely. But that's it. That's it for now, Brandi. It's been really delightful to speak to you about this episode and to just talk to you generally about Star Trek, which has been long overdue, I think. So thank you for coming on Make It So, and hopefully it won't be the last time you're on the show. And until that day comes, where would you like to direct people to where they can find you and find what you're up to? And what are you up to? Give us a little bit of a debrief.
All right. Well, thank you so much for having me. I am delighted to finally get to talk to you. And I would be back anytime. So, in fact, I'm going to be back when you start season 2 of Discovery.
You are.
Yes, indeed.
You are indeed.
So, you can find me on Twitter at BrandiWine12. Brandi is spelled with an I, so BrandiWine, the number 12. You can also find me lurking in the Babel Conference, which is the Trek FM listeners group on Facebook. And you will find me on the main show for Star Trek Discovery on Trek FM called The Edge. And I do that podcast with two wonderful Australian guys named Liam and Nick. And they've become very fast. Well, I've known Liam before, but we've all become very fast friends and are really enjoying ourselves. So you can
lovely.
You can find that on the Trek FM master feed or the feed for The Edge. And also I do a podcast with my husband, Dave, called the Dark Corner Podcast. And we basically speak about whatever nerdy stuff we feel like talking about, but sort of from a different perspective, because we are A, both introverts, and B, both goths. So that sheds some different light. People think goths are all doom and gloom, and they obviously have no idea the way goths really are.
Yeah. Like any subculture, people don't get it, do they? Unless, it's true.
Exactly. Yeah. And so you can find that at darkcornerpodcast.com. I also have a solo podcast called Headcanon, because I headcanon the heck out of stuff a lot of the time. People are like, well, I don't understand how they got from this to this. And I go, okay, sit down. This is how I visualize it. But,
very good.
So that's basically a journey through my very tangential brain and all the craziness and chaos therein, and whatever thing I want to focus on for that week. So my nerddom extends to many different realms, some of which may be surprising to people who have only known me through podcasting. So keep an eye out for that. Also, you can find that at darkcornerpodcast.com. And finally, I do a live show with my friends Dan Gunther and Bruce Gibson every Friday night at 9 p.m. Eastern, 6 p.m. Pacific, called The Unready Room. And we started that by covering every episode of Star Trek Picard. And now that Picard has finished, we had decided to keep on going. And so we are having actually people in the chat put forth 4 episodes or movies of Star Trek. And then we do what we call a to poll. And on Twitter, and the fans determine which thing we're going to talk about next. So far, cool. We this last night, as of the recording of this particular podcast, we did Balance of Terror, which is an original series first season episode 14. And I hadn't seen it for probably a couple of years. And I had a very viscerally emotional reaction to it that I did not expect. So that was interesting. Yeah. You can find, you can actually find the past videos. They're all still up on Dan's YouTube channel, which is Kurt Ratz Productions. Please subscribe, because he does fantastic videos, not just the live show. He just puts out great and very positive Trek content. Not that he is not critical, but he is critical in a positive way. So constructive criticism.
Yeah.
So
that's always the best.
Yeah, and if you couldn't tell, if you write it out, you could probably tell. But Kurt Ratz is Star Trek spelled backwards. So if that helps you find it,
yeah.
So those are the myriad places you can find me.
Amazing. So much to keep people busy there. Definitely go and check it all out, guys. I haven't checked all of that myself, so I'm going to get on that too. So do follow my lead on that one. So brilliant. Thank you, Brandi. That's great. And we'll be back next week to cover Into the Forest I Go, the 9th episode of Discovery. And Kurt will be back for that one with an all-new guest. next week, joining him for that voyage. But yeah, it's been really fun talking about this episode. Remember to check out the We Made This Podcast Network at We Made This Pod and wemadethispod.com, and we'll give you a little bit of a taster of what other shows are going on the network just after this. But until then, it's time to get into the Parvan teleporter and engage. Previously on the We Made This Network. By projection light.
Dickinson also brings the audience's attention to a then unknown Audrey, who shines like a bright, pure beacon the whole film. It's quite amazing to think that only a year after this film, she would be cast in the film that would catapult her to superstardom and garner her an Oscar win. But it's also not difficult to believe. Her performance is so unaffected, as if she's living the part of Nora, which, as I've said, she almost had already. And it's also wonderful to see her dance, particularly during the audition scene towards the start of the film, where she flits and spins like an angel. It made me think of how she had danced during the war for audiences who were not allowed to clap due to the prohibition of public gatherings, but how she brought joy to those people as she brings joy to everyone who's watching this film every time she dances.
Don't say the C word.
Sex, drugs and rock and roll isn't a cliche. I've seen it all. There's a unique group of groupies that feel the need to collect, if that's the right term to use, like all of the band members, as in to sleep with all the band members and all of the crew.
Oh, wow. So they kind of, do they work their way from the top down, or do they work their way from the bottom up?
Yeah, get to whoever they can first. And it would always be me and one of the band members that they'd never get. And I was quite proud of that. I was like, yeah, I'm the one that you don't know about. So like, you can never brag. I'm not a bragging right.
That's pretty admirable. And is there a particular reason why you're not going to shag the groupies?
At the time, I was a virgin and I didn't want my first time to be with just some random lady on the road.
Bloody hell, that really is admirable. I think I'd have thrown my virginity at anybody, to be honest with you.
It got to the point a few years on, like, I was like, I'm thinking about it now. But no.
The time is now, a Millennium podcast.
The way that he's offered that job, I think he's done that before. It's not out of character for him to go into situations like that. I know it's done a bit more, with a bit more levity earlier on the season in Goodbye Charlie, where he goes to speak to the social worker and he lays off all of his problems, which is a great scene in that episode. Yeah,
it's very hard to have that sort of levity when you're dealing with literal Nazis, to be fair.
Well, it's a slightly different take on the same kind of.
Yeah, I'm wondering whether the Mel Brooks sequence of that would probably be something to behold.
Check out all of these shows and more on the We Made This Podcast Network. Make It So, a Star Trek Universe podcast, was created and is produced and hosted by Tony Black and Kurt North. You can find the show on Twitter at Jean-Luc Podard and on Facebook in the Make It So, a Star Trek podcast fan group discussion group. Check out the We Made This Network at We Made This Pod on Twitter and on Facebook by typing in We Made This, and you can find all of our shows on our website, wemadethispod.com. Thanks for listening.